Proverbs chapter number 1, and we'll be in verse number 8 through 19 today, or this evening. Lord bless you for your faithfulness to come to the midweek service. I trust that it is a blessing to you. I know it's a blessing, not because of who your pastor is, but it's just a blessing to be in the Lord's house often. And so I trust that tonight will be no different. We're working our way through Proverbs, and we are entering into the prologue. So last Wednesday, we saw the title in verse 1. We saw the purpose in verse 2 through 6. And then in verse 7, we saw the foundation for all of Proverbs, where Solomon writes that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Let's begin now, verse number 8. Proverbs 1, Solomon writes, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother. For they shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. If they say, Come with us, let us lay wait for blood. Let us look privily for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them up alive as the grave, and whole as those that go down into the pit. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son," Solomon says, "walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain is the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood. They look privily for their own lives. So are the ways of every one that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof." May God bless the reading of his word. You may be seated. This section, and really all of Proverbs, but really this section where Solomon is addressing his son, it kind of shows us that Solomon understands the importance and the crossroads that all young people face. And he knows that it won't be long before his son is faced with offers of love and excitement and money, and all the wrong ways, and all the ways that go against the Word of God. And there are plenty of snares out there for young people. There's plenty of snares out there for old folks too, and everyone in between. So Solomon understands that his sons must choose between wisdom and folly, between life and death. And in Proverbs, that's often what we see, a contrast between good and evil, and no third option. We tend to think, and we've probably started this when we were teenagers, just to think about the moment and the day that we're living in. And Solomon shows us that wisdom looks down the road to the choice, where the choice will take us. So let's look real quick at verse number 8 and verse number 9. It really sets up the principle for what he's going to illustrate in the second half of these verses here. Notice that he says, "My son, hear the instruction of thy father, and forsake not the law of thy mother." Not just here, but here in particular, Solomon is reiterating the fact that godly wisdom ought to be passed down from parents to children. From parents to children. Parents are responsible to teach their children and to set a godly example towards them, and not just doing what they say, but also doing what they demonstrate, what they set an example of. Think of what Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7 says, "In these words which I command thee," he's writing to the parents, "shall be in thy mouth, in thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. Here and in other places, God is very clear that the godly education that a child receives, that aspect of their life must be homeschooled. I'm not saying that public school is always wrong or a Christian school is always wrong, but Solomon is saying that the instruction that a child receives about God has to primarily come from godly parents. Of course, we have churches, we have Sunday school teachers, and all of those help children, but there's no replacement for a godly parent. And for a parent that's willing to take the responsibility over the spiritual lives of their children. You say, well, you might be here and you're saying, well, I'm past the stage of life where there's kids in my home. I'll tell you that you can be a unique encouragement to others who have kids in their home right now, and finding ways to encourage them and to provoke them to be the godly leaders and examples that they are supposed to be. He says this also. He says, my son. Now, that exemplifies two things. It shows that he's got authority over his son, but it also shows that he loves and cares about his son. And those two things have to go hand in hand. You just can't have all love towards a child without authority, and you can't have all authority without love. And the father understands that his son is going to carry on his family name, and so he's got to make sure and instill within his son these values. Parents are over the child, and the parents have authority over the child. But as we're going to see here, that the child must make a decision themselves if they're going to honor the authority that God has set up in their life. Now, this is not just about kids. This isn't a children's church lesson. There's application for us here as well, because kids aren't the only ones under authority. Notice what he says here, my son, hear the instruction of thy father. And here's a very important word, forsake not the law of thy mother. Here's the idea that when you're forsaking something, that the language shows that you're throwing something off. You're disposing of it. You're done with something that's even valuable here. And what Solomon is teaching is that although wise instruction, and we'll see this here with the illustration, the encounter that the son is going to have, that the father's warning the son against, although it seems to restrict now, there's a benefit in the future. Look at what he says here. They shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck. Let me mention this also before I move on from verse number 8, that oftentimes in Proverbs, it's the dad that's giving the spiritual instruction, but here it's the instruction of thy father and the law of thy mother, that both parents ought to be involved. And of course, the father is the primary one responsible for the spiritual health and direction of the children. It's interesting, the phrases that he uses here in verse number 9, an ornament of grace unto thy head. Now, if I say ornaments, the first thing that comes into your mind might be a Christmas ornament. That really doesn't make a lot of sense to have something on top of your head that's a round Christmas ornament. But really, if you think of how it makes a Christmas tree more beautiful, and we've had things over here on our Christmas tree this past Christmas season, and there was these little ornaments all around it, and they were making it look more beautiful. Now the ornament of grace upon thy head would be something like a wreath of a crown that was placed on them. For conquering kings, they would come back wearing a crown, or they would come back wearing an ornament of grace that showed that they were the victors, that they fought an enemy and they won. And so Solomon is saying here that if you will keep these sayings, the law of your mother, the instruction of your father, that you're going to have victory over the enemy in your life. It's grace. It's an ornament of grace, so it's pleasing to others and it's attractive to others. And for all those that embrace this wisdom, you'll find that eventually you'll be victors. There's going to be an ornament of grace upon thy head. Juliet, can you come up here? Because he also said this, and chains about thy neck. Now, if I mention chains around someone's neck, go and come up here, Jules, so everyone can see you. The first thing that I think of is restriction. So I, as a father, am going to give Juliet, throughout her childhood, a number of rules. And here's what those rules do. They restrict. They really limit what she is able to do. I think of a dog that we had a number of years ago when we lived over here on Ash, just north of Grand and Ash, just past what used to be the Dollar General there. And we had a backyard, and it was a chain link backyard. And there was a dog that we had, Clancy. He could climb a chain link fence. And that was incredibly talented of him. And the problem then, of course, is that we lived on Ash. And if he runs out there, Clancy's going to get run over. And so I had to put a heavy chain around his neck. And that chain limited him. You think of chains that go around a prisoner, even shackles that would go around their neck and their wrists and even their feet sometimes, that really limits what they're going to be able to do. And here, this isn't obviously a real chain, but if you can imagine here that this is a chain, but the idea is that it's kind of anchored in the instruction that a father is giving to their child, to their son, or in this case, to our daughter. Jules, you can't really go very far, can you? No, I mean, you could try to go this way. Try to walk towards the piano some. You try to walk down the stairs a little bit. She can only go so far. That's the idea. That's at least our first thought, that here's what, now, of course, Juliet is the exception, but here's what we all think as kids. That the rules that my parents give me restrict me. There's a whole lot of other things that I wish I could be doing right now, and we tend, here's the problem that Solomon knows, is that we tend to think that rules restrict, and so the tendency is that we forsake the rules. And Solomon says, hold on, I know there's going to be a tendency for you to want to throw off these restrictions, to forsake the law of your mother and just get rid of them, but he's saying forsake not. You can go sit down, Juliet. I appreciate the illustration there and you helping out. He says, this shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck. Teenagers especially, by and large, they can't wait to get out of these chains. And they think, when I'm grown up, when I'm an adult, I'm going to have my own car, I'm going to have my own freedom, I'm going to have my own phone, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. And maybe you were like that as a teenager. I really didn't have that kind of rebellious teenage stint in my teenage years, but we still have that tendency even after we become full-grown adults. And no one really appreciates restricting rules. Some of you drive like you don't appreciate speed limit signs that restrict us, or rules that restrict us from being on our phones when we drive. Solomon here, he's helping us understand the importance of having restriction in our life. He plays out a scenario for his son in these next few verses that he knows that his son is going to face someday. He says, my son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. Okay, so that word entice has the idea of trying to get you excited about something. All right? Maybe you've seen young people get excited about a football game, and they get all pumped up. There's a pregame pep talk, and maybe even with soccer or whatever sports your kids are involved with, it's that same idea that there are friends, there's peers, There's influences in this young man's life, and they're going to try and get him excited about something. And he says, listen, don't agree with them. Don't get excited. They promise thrills. They promise immediate things. They say here in these verses, come with us and let us lay wait for blood. Let us look privily for the innocent without cause. Now, obviously, that's a bad idea. Why? Because you're not supposed to kill innocent people, right? You're not supposed to go and just find someone that's innocent, an easy target, and go attack that person. No, everyone here knows and understands that you're not supposed to be violent towards other people. You're not supposed to go steal someone else's rules. And so notice what these young people are telling Solomon's son. If they say, hey, let's look for in verse number 11, come with us, let us lay wait for blood, let us look privily for the innocent without cause, let us swallow them up alive as the grave and whole as those that go down to the pit. Here's what they're saying, let's throw off these restrictions. I know that our parents and our authorities would never approve of these freedoms, these thrills that we want to have. So let's throw these things off. And here's what else they promise. Look at verse number 13. We shall find all precious substance. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in thy lot among us. Let us all have one purse. Here's what they're promising. They're promising thrills. They're promising quick riches. They're doing this by greed, that they want what they want and they don't want to wait and do it the wrong way. In verse number 17, we see that their instruction, them forsaking instruction, is going to lead to their restrictions. It's as if Solomon is saying this. Look at verse number 17. He says, surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, and they lay wait for their own blood. They look privily for their own lives, and so are the ways of everyone that is greedy of gain, which taketh away the life of the owners thereof. Sinful, wicked people, Solomon says, are dumb. I don't know when the last time is you try to catch a bird. We really don't catch birds in our society as much unless you own chickens. It's probably been a while for some of us, but how many of you all remember trying to catch chickens? Y'all ever done that before? We've got, 8 or 9 chickens at our house. 10? There's 10 now. There's 10 chickens at our house. And every so often, they get out of the coop, they roam the backyard, and you don't come at a chicken with it facing you and you just running up and spreading your arms out like that. Unless you're extremely talented, that bird's just going to take off and run somewhere else, unless you got it cornered. Now, typically, I've learned for myself that the best way to catch a chicken is to sneak up behind it. And you can't be slow either. The chickens somehow have a sixth sense, and you got to go and grab them real fast. And what Solomon is saying here is, if you've got a net and you're going to catch a bird, you're not going to wait till the bird is flying right at you and then spread out this giant net for the bird to fly into. Birds aren't made that way. That's not how life works. He says here, they lay wait for their own blood. They look privily for their own lives. They're setting a trap for the innocent. They're going to come into and fall into the trap themselves. They were going to do harm to someone else, but all they end up doing is harm to themselves. So throwing off instruction, it doesn't remove restrictions, but eventually, rather than them gain the thrills and the excitement and the money and even murdering someone else, now they find themselves with the lives taken away. That's the way of greed, Solomon warns us. You'll end up the victim of your own foolish wickedness. And this is the principle of life that happens to everyone that is greedy of gain. Everyone that says, I want what I want right now. And so here's what I'm going to do to get what I want right now. I'm going to throw off the restrictions to get what I want. Here's what Solomon is saying, though, in the beginning, verse number 8 and verse number 9, that rules don't add restrictions, rules add beauty. There is a beauty to restraint, and wise people embrace rules. Wise people wear the wise teachings around their neck, like an ornament that would ordain their head. Solomon says that a wise son, a wise daughter is going to wear something around their neck. I think of, I don't know how many times I've mentioned it, I'm excited about it. I'm on keto, and I've lost like 11 pounds now in just a number of weeks, and my energy and my focus is great. Listen, that didn't happen for any other reason than I chose to restrict myself. If you will, I chose to put that chain around my neck and say, no to carbs and no to eating after 6 o'clock at night and before noon in the morning or around noontime. I'm not going to eat any of those times. And those restrictions that are keeping me from eating food that I would love and that I miss dearly with all of my heart, I'm having to tell myself no, but there's an advantage to restrictions. Fidelity in marriage can seem restrictive, but it leads to deeper trust, greater intimacy, lasting security. Think of a wedding band. It's a band, but it's advertising to others that I'm restricted for my wife. Godly instructions are rules and restrictions. But here's what Solomon teaches us, that restrictions are beautiful. Restrictions add beauty. In the 1950s, Theodore Geisel was fast becoming a famous author. His longtime friend, Bennett Cerf, challenged him to write a new children's book that would use only 50 different words that a kindergartner could understand. So not 50 words in the book, but using a vocabulary of 50 words. The author, Geisel, didn't think that it would be easy, and several times he complained about how constraining that would be. Like he I think is quoted by saying that was like a straitjacket that was restraining his imagination. But that challenging restraint eventually gave way to a discipline. And his persistent discipline would eventually pay off. As he wrote his draft for a book, then he rewrote it. And he rewrote it again, each time whittling down the number of different words that were used. And each time he depended more and more on rhyme until eventually, in the 1960s, he published a children's literature masterpiece. Some conservative estimates claim that there have been 17 million copies of this book sold, and it is the 4th best-selling children's book in America. The author, Theodore Geisel, is better known by his pen name, Dr. Seuss. And that book that his friend challenged him to use only 50 words to write was Green Eggs and Ham. Now listen, that's a children's book, and I don't know how many times I've read that book. My children can probably quote it. It's a ridiculous book to read, but it's successful. As far as an author is concerned, that's a huge success. And Dr. Seuss, though he has since passed on from this life, he's wearing literary awards all over the place. Some other estimates, I didn't put in my notes, some others are saying that there's over 200 million copies of this book sold. It's incredible the reach that it's had in it. But here's what Solomon is saying. Juliet, can you come back up here? That godly rules aren't here to restrict. Now, hold on. This is what we think of rules. This is what we think of godly instruction. But that's not what godly rules do. Instead, Solomon says that godly rules, godly restriction, godly instruction, it doesn't restrict someone's life. It adds beauty to your life. That for his children, for his son, he's trying to say, listen, I'm going to give you some instruction. Over these next 10 chapters, we see just the introduction to these Proverbs of Solomon. And then starting in chapter number 10, there's a whole other section. And then there's another section of Solomon's Proverbs towards his son. And he's trying to add beauty. And he's trying to add ornaments to his children. Hold on, he understands that this is his job, but he also knows that children tend to think of chains around the neck not as something that adds beauty, but rather something that restricts. And so he says, listen, they're going, hear the instruction of thy father. Forsake not the law of thy mother, because they're going to be an ornament of grace unto thy head, and chains about thy neck. That's Anna's necklace. Take care of that, Jules, and go sit back down. Here's the challenge, though. That much like a rebellious teenager, we tend to forsake or throw off godly instructions because we think that they restrict us. This might come for someone that is given to the vice of alcohol as an instruction for them, as wisdom from the Word of God that they ought not to be overcome by any sin, their bodies, the temple, not to be overcome with wine. Even in Proverbs, there's multiple examples of how someone ought not to be overcome by alcohol. And here's what they're thinking in their hearts. Maybe they want to overcome alcohol, but eventually they find a struggle that those rules are restrictive. And so what they see is the restriction in their life, but what God sees is the beauty he's trying to add to that person's life. The same is true of someone that is challenged to read their Bible. And maybe you've already got that discipline established in your life, but not every believer does. And they see that as a restriction and even a difficult thing for them to do in their life, to discipline themselves where they stay focused on a passage of Scripture and have to give some thought to that. We introduced the New Testament in a year this past Sunday, and many people, I'm sure, will start that. But many more have started and failed to complete that because they find that restricting. Not that they don't want to do that, but they find that restricting. Others would find challenges of faith, like giving a tithe, to be restrictive. Commitment to faith promise, that's a restraint, we would say. When the time comes, even this fall, as we go through soul-winning training, then we're going to find that getting out and actually knocking on someone's door, that's restrictive to my weekly time. Financial Peace University, to stick to a budget, to pay off some debt, to pay off my house early, that's nothing but restrictive. But really what God is doing through His wisdom and through godly wisdom is He's trying to beautify your life, not restrict it. So here's the encouragement from Solomon: to stay in the chain. He doesn't just say, notice carefully, it shall be an ornament of grace unto thy head and chains about thy neck. That's in the plural. There's more than one chain. And so a wise person then is going to welcome the restraints of godly wisdom in their life. A wise person will welcome the restraints of godly wisdom in their life. I didn't appreciate getting spanked as a child. If you had a parent that spanked you, you didn't either when you were a kid. I don't care how spiritual you think you are now. You didn't. But there came a time when I was well into my teenage years and maybe into my 20s, I can remember going back to my parents. After having seen my peers whose parents did not put those chains of restriction upon their necks, coming up to my parents and say, Mom, Dad, thank you for the discipline in my life. In fact, now as a parent, I kind of have this desire for my children and for the youth of our church that they'll come and we're thinking, man, if they'll be really wise, then they're going to be looking for instruction. They're going to be looking for correction. It's like a lady that's shopping for jewelry because she's thinking, man, this will make me look that much more graceful, that much more pleasing in the sight of those that I'm around. That's what we want for our children, for them to have not just an attitude of accepting the change and restriction, but a full understanding that this is going to add value, and so I'm going to seek for the restrictions in my life. Now listen, that's just not for children. But every time that the Bible is taught in Sunday school, read, I trust on a daily basis, or preached here at church, I tell you what the Lord is really trying to do is to beautify our lives. That comes through restriction. That comes through Timothy having instruction to reprove, rebuke, and exhort with all long-suffering. But a wise person will come to a parent anticipating and longing for instruction. It's kind of a difficult time when my parents kind of said, you're off on your own, don't call us anymore. Make your own decisions. As a child of God, I think a wise Christian will come to church, come to their time with the Lord, even come to a Bible class saying, Lord, would you please teach me something? Lord, even if that means that there's something in my life that I need to restrict for a while, for you to add beauty. There's no beauty in our life outside of discipline. The fast pleasures, the fast money, all these things have their own snare, and we tend to throw off instruction, but wise men welcome the restraints of godly wisdom.